Hi, everyone. Did you hear me before ask about the key and the remote? Okay, so I didn't just look like a funny person dangling a key and a remote and no sound. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had food and libations before we got in here. It will still be there, so don't worry. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria J. Collis-Buthelezi, and I have the pleasure of being the director of the Center for the Study of Race, Gender, and Class and the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study. And we are thrilled to co-host this lecture by Professor Vereen A. Shepherd with the CARICOM Heads of Mission in South Africa, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Haiti. I'm just going to make a few preliminary remarks, then I will hand over to the Minister Counselor for the Jamaican High Commission, Mr. Andrew Francis, and Mr. Francis will introduce Professor Shepherd. We will then have Professor Shepherd's lecture. I will offer a brief response and will open for questions and answers. And then I will hand over to my colleague from the Trinidad High Commission. And then we will depart and hopefully meet again at another point in time. I stand here as the representative of the University of Johannesburg and a Trinidadian who lives in Johannesburg. As such, it is a special honor to open this event, in which we will hear from an esteemed Caribbean scholar who has worked on questions of reparations and repair and gender equity and equality in the wake of what another Jamaican scholar calls irreparable evil. It seems poignant that we have this lecture on decolonizing education, a post-independence imperative, on this day that South Africa has inaugurated its 5th president since full democracy in 1994. This is an amazing moment full of both hope and perhaps resignation, commitment and frustration. 30 years into democracy in South Africa, more than 60 years since the inception of formal political decolonization in the Anglophone Caribbean, and 220 years since Haiti declared its independence and the inviolability of human life and claimed humanity for Black people against the tyranny of chattel slavery and the hierarchy of being. If we reference but a sliver of that history, we know that freedom often waxes and wanes, moves in fits and starts, and we must therefore savor it. We must claim even small victories and recognize the process as much as the outcome. It seems to me that wherever you sit on the political spectrum or in the world today, this is a day to treasure that the process happened and that itself is victory for freedom. The work is not over, and perhaps it never is. But in the long push towards full and lasting freedom, Professor Vereen A. Shepherd has been a tireless thinker, policy change agent, and activist. At least 2 of her co-edited volumes I want to mention here, and I can say more about those later in my response. Caribbean Freedom, Economy and Society from Emancipation to the Present, co-edited with Sir Hilary Beckles in 1993, and also co-edited with Sir Hilary Beckles, Caribbean Slavery in the Atlantic World. These are critical texts that engage the question of world-making after slavery and the plantation. So I think it is a particular honor that we have Professor Shepherd with us here today to give us remarks, as this is a day of celebration for post-colonial, post-independence, and post-apartheid societies. Our Vice Chancellor was going to be with us here today to offer some welcoming remarks. And he unfortunately had to make his apologies, but he shared his opening remarks, and I just want to read it on his behalf. Our Vice Chancellor, Professor Likotwa Mpedi. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the University of Johannesburg for this afternoon's public lecture that will be delivered by our esteemed visiting professor, Professor Vereen A. Shepherd, who has been graciously hosted in South Africa by the Jamaican High Commission. As the author Robert Heinlein once wrote, a generation which ignores history has no past and no future. We are all too familiar with this in South Africa. We are a nation grappling with the profound and lasting impacts of apartheid, yet we are also acutely aware that ignoring the painful chapters of our history can lead to the perpetuation of injustices and the erosion of collective memory. This is the very antithesis to healing and growth. Our scars of systemic racism and socioeconomic inequality remain evident, but they also demonstrate the importance of remembering and learning from the past. It is in the understanding of this fraught history that we are able to build a more equitable society and ensure that history does not repeat itself, to lean into the mistakes of the past such that they are not repeated. This principle extends globally, reminding us that acknowledging and addressing historical injustices is crucial, is a famous adage. We are not alone in this journey. This process of reckoning with history and charting a way forward resonates across diverse corners of our world. We share this painful legacy with the CARICOM region. In recognizing this painful but necessary process, we are deeply honored that Professor Shepherd will speak to us about reparations as well as decolonizing education out of the Caribbean community, and why reparations matter to us all, and why decolonization, particularly in terms of education post-independence, matters to us all. The campaign seeks to address the enduring legacies of slavery and colonialism by demanding compensation and acknowledgement from European nations that benefited from these exploitative systems. It reflects the need for justice and redress for the deep socioeconomic and cultural wounds inflicted upon Caribbean societies. As Maya Angelou once phrased it, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Professor Shepherd is, of course, well poised to deliver this lecture. She is and has been the University of the West Indies, Director of the Universities of the West Indies Center for Reparation Research, Chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Before this, she was University Director of UWI's Regional Institute for Gender and Development Studies and a member of the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. And there are many more accolades, so I'm not going to go further because I know Mr. Francis is going to introduce our esteemed guest. Let me hand over to him and just say thank you for coming together, joining with us. Thank you to the heads of mission and the entire diplomatic corps who made this happen. And thank you to the JIAS team and RGC team. I want to also recognize my wonderful boss, Professor Victoria Graham, who's in the audience with us. Thank you, and Mr. Francis, without further ado.
Distinguished alumnus of the University of Johannesburg, distinguished guests, Professor Graham, good evening. First, let me convey apologies on behalf of the CARICOM heads of mission, the High Commissioner of Jamaica, the High Commissioner of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the High Commissioner of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and the Ambassador of the Republic of Haiti. They really wanted to be here, but of course you all know they were called away to other more pressing matters. But without further ado, I would like to say that they are still pleased though to partner with the University of Johannesburg to present this inaugural lecture on decolonizing education, a post-independence imperative. This lecture coincides with 50 years since the establishment of the CARICOM community, of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, the longest surviving regional political and economic entity on the globe. CARICOM comprises 15 member states, all of which are washed by the Caribbean Sea and 3 countries bordering Latin America. We are a diverse group, defined largely by historical linkages and of colonialism. As a region, we have made great strides in establishing and maintaining key institutions, such as the Pan-Caribbean University of the West Indies, the West Indies cricket team, and other regional institutions in the areas of education, health, peace, and security, just to name a few. The Caribbean Single Market and Economy, the CSME, was brought about by the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which laid the foundation of a regional trade supported by a Caribbean Court of Justice. We are therefore proud of the accomplishment of our region, but more so, the scholarship and intellectual brilliance that our region produces. We are therefore, as we seek as a region to strengthen and build our ties with Africa, the staging of educational and cultural exchanges are natural expressions of our ties that bind us together. I therefore have the honor to introduce one of the Caribbean's leading public intellectuals and a leading light of the global South, Professor Vereen Shepherd, a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Society, honorary fellow of the Jesus College, University of Cambridge, and Professor Emerita of History and Gender Studies at the University of the West Indies. Her areas of economic specialization are in African and African American history and gender and migration studies within the specific fields of slavery and alternatives to the sugar economy in the 18th and 19th century Jamaica, migration and the Asian diaspora in the Caribbean, and discourses on gender within Caribbean history. She's a trained teacher and historian and taught at various secondary schools before joining the Department of History at the University at Mona campus in Kingston. She taught history for many years before leaving the Department of History to assume the post of University Director of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. After leaving the IGDS, she became a consultant director of the Center of Registration Reparation Research, the first such center at any university. She is a United Nations expert. Professor Shepherd is one of the 3 vice chairs of the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD. She also chaired this body for 2 years, 2022 to 2024. Indeed, she's the first Jamaican and CARICOM citizen to be on the CERD in its over 50 years of existence, polling the highest votes when elected in 2015 and when re-elected in 2019. She has recently started her 3rd term as a member of the CERD. She is also a prolific author. She has been an author, co-author, editor, and compiler of some 16 books, among them the biography of Lucille Mathurin Meir, Women in Caribbean History, Engendering Caribbean History, Cross-Cultural Perspectives, Livestock, Sugar and Slavery, Contested Terrain in Colonial Jamaica, Transits to Settlers, Lectures on Slavery, Emancipation and Post-Colonial Jamaica. Her edited and co-edited book include Questioning Creole, Creolization, Discourses in Caribbean Culture, Cyrus Perkins, Busher's Mistress, or Catherine the Fugitive, a stirring romance of the days of slavery in Jamaica in 2003. She has co-authored 5 books. She has published 70 peer-reviewed articles. And I realized that if I'm to go through all of them, that would be the lecture itself. It's a whole heap of things. She's a much sought-after public speaker in issues of human rights, enslavement of Africans, reparation, labor, migration, and gender. There's those who say that the only place that have not invited her to give a lecture is Antarctica. That's probably in your inbox somewhere. She has lectured at the universities in Africa, Ghana, Mauritius, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, Asia, in the Philippines, Australia, Canada, where she was a network scholar at the York University, Caribbean and Europe. She has served on the editorial board of several journals, including Small Axe, Atlantic Studies, and the Journal of Caribbean History. Professor Berwin Shepherd is an activist scholar, and she's the vice chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and a member of the Jamaican National Council on Reparation. She's a past chair of the Jamaican Reparations Commission. She maintains a rigorous schedule crisscrossing the globe, giving lectures and talks at various institutions, not only universities. She has spoken to parliaments, groupings. She's a firm believer in teaching history outside the classroom. So most relevant, please make note of this. She hosts a 2-hour weekly show talking history on Jamaica's nationwide FM for the past 12 years. Her belief in the decolonization of the landscape has led to the erection of several monuments to African ancestors at the university and all over the Jamaican landscape. She is a recipient of several awards. In 2013, she was awarded Jamaica's Order of Distinction Commander class by the government of Jamaica. She has received the 9th Marcus Garvey UNIA Award. She has received the UE Vice Chancellor's Award. And she has graced the Black Achievement Wall of Honor at the UN alongside President Barack Obama, Derek Walcott, Toussaint Louverture, and Rosa Parks. In all she does, she foregrounds the importance of history, sharing Marcus Garvey's views that history is the landmark by which we are directed to the true course of life. The history of a movement, the history of a nation, the history of a race is a guidepost to that movement's destiny, the nation's destiny, and that race's destiny. And she agrees with the late Nelson Mandela that you can't really be proud of yourself if you don't know your history. Without further ado, and after editing 2 pages of her introduction, I give you Professor Berwin Shepherd.
And in all of that, believe it or not, I found time to get married and to have 2 sons. But thanks for the warm greetings and the introduction. I think you'll agree with me that that's the type of introduction that we want to make our parents proud. That's for our parents. It's not really for you. So it's just let the record show that my parents would have been proud had they lived to see all the things that they worked to ensure. And I think we always have to remember that, you know, because so many of us have reached where we have reached today because of other people's struggles and other people's passion and commitment. And I stand here on the shoulders of so many. I also wanted to welcome my 2 friends who are here with me, Dr. Mullings, Lena K. Mullings, and Ms. Golden. Please stand so you can be welcomed. And they're in South Africa for the first time. And thank you for making the time to be with me. I want to thank the High Commissioners, not just the High Commissioner of Jamaica and the staff of the Jamaican Mission, but the staff of the various CARICOM missions based in South Africa for collaborating with the staff and students of this university to organize the lecture and hosting me. And it's a very important day for South Africa. Not just for South Africa, I think for global Africa. Because I think that despite the struggles that we're still going through to actualize our freedom truly, we have to say we have come a long way in this struggle for rights and respect. And I wish South Africa all the best as you continue on this path. Jamaica, Guyana, my husband's country of Trinidad and Tobago, and Haiti, a country to which we all owe so much. I really thank you for putting this together. Haiti is very special, you know, having freed themselves, the people of Haiti having freed themselves from French colonialism and seized their independence, offered freedom to all enslaved people who reached their shores, including the Jamaican boat people in 1817, who stowed away on the Deep Nine. When the owner of the boat went to Haiti to ask back for his property, President Pétion showed him the boat down, moored somewhere. Let's thank Haiti for being a beacon of freedom in this world for over 200 years. We're assembled here in the week in which South Africa and Global Africa mark the Day of the African Child, or Youth Day, in memory of the brave children of Soweto. And I know my friends just came from there because they had to be there to see for themselves history. The history that was history, that is still in action. Because they claimed the right to be what they wanted to be. That is another important moment for us every June. And there's another important June anniversary because today, in fact, is celebrated as Juneteenth in the United States of America. It marks the day in 1865 when the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, USA, found out that they had been freed after the end of the Civil War, 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Well, I call it willful amnesia by those who should have carried the news of freedom. Anyway, those are moments to remember. Being in South Africa also brings back memories for me. In fact, I'm thrilled to be back here once more. This is my third visit and the fourth occasion this year alone in which I am speaking as a historian and social justice advocate to a South African audience. I just spoke to the Council of World Mission assembling on the issue of transforming power. Before that, in June, on June 2, I spoke at the launch of the Reparation Hub at the University of the Free State. And in March, I spoke virtually to the South African Parliament on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of freedom in South Africa. My very first visit, though, was in August 2004, when former President Mbeki invited 3 Caribbean women, 2 from Haiti, and I was the one from Jamaica, to engage in an educational tour on Haiti and the wider Caribbean and their relationship with South Africa. South Africa had by then given shelter, as Jamaica had done before, to the Aristides after their kidnapping and exile. It was a proud moment for me because anyone who knows the history of Haiti, and that's the Taino word, indigenous people's word for the country, and that is why I always use it. But I respect the fact that, everyone else knows it as Haiti. But anyone who knows the history of Haiti will be proud to share that history, especially to announce the rightness of Haiti's just demand from France for reparation. And I returned a second time to engage in educational events planned by the Aristides. It was that post-independence commitment to decolonial justice, using education as the medium by which that philosophy could be spread, and the knowledge about how Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean was advancing that mission that has caused our people to be in the international vanguard. And that's why they invite us from time to time to speak about our own struggles. Now, as we all know, colonialism has disfigured all societies affected by foreign invasion and conquest. You in South Africa know that too well. I do not have to relate to you the experience of apartheid and the legacies of that system. What I will say is that because the Caribbean was similarly affected, our region is proud to have contributed to the ending of that inhuman and unjust system and celebrate your 30th anniversary of freedom with you. In the specific case of the Caribbean, the scars of the trafficking in enslaved Africans, chattel enslavement, and post-emancipation and post-independence racial discrimination are still evident. The legacies are around for all to see. You have to remember that for over 400 years, Africans and their descendants were classified in law as non-humans, chattel property, and real estate. They were captured and trafficked to lands far from their homes to be subjected to a life of chattel enslavement. They were denied recognition as members of the human family by laws derived from the parliaments and palaces of Europe and subjected to the ideology of racism that denigrated all things African. Indeed, many argue that no other group has ever been subjected to attacks as serious to their physical and mental integrity over a comparable time period as the Africans deported to the Americas and their descendants. In his 1952 Black Skin, White Mask, Frantz Fanon analyzed the impact of colonialism and its deforming effects and argued that white colonialism imposed an existentially false and degrading existence upon its black victims to the extent that it demanded their conformity to its distorted values. The physical brutality that was an expression of European racial ideology and which caused so much psychological trauma to Africans and their descendants populates the pages of history texts. This subhuman stamp, while eliminating rights, opened the door for punishments such as the flogging, the rape, the hanging, the mutilation like the splitting of people's noses, severe branding with hot irons, the cutting off of both ears, whipping and/or banishment for striking a white person, among other barbaric tactics used to instill fear. as a result of this history of brutality, today, what Edward Linenfeld describes as that indigestible fishbone of slavery still continues to stick in our throats. Indeed, the remnants of this system called legacies can be seen across every post-slavery society, when emancipation was followed by a century of racial apartheid, in which stratification impeded the development of race consciousness and black nationalism. So today, like you, we are still working hard to reimagine our societies because of our full belief, as articulated by His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie I, and reinforced by our icon and social justice conscience, Bob Marley. And we're going to screen this second slide. And we all know it, and you can talk along with me or sing if you wish. Because it is true that until the philosophy, which holds one race superior and another inferior, is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, everywhere is war. And until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, until the color of a person's skin, I'm genderizing it, you understand, I can't say just a man's skin. That was then, this is today. Until the color of a person's skin is of no more significance than the color of his or her eyes, and until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, there is war. And until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. And now, everywhere is truly war. And if Bob were around today, he would still be lamenting war in the East, war in the West, war up north, and war down south. Everywhere is war. Rather than ending war, war is being fought on every front in the global south. And not just physical combat with military weapons and strategies. We are fighting ideological wars, including in education. Why? Because separate and unequal education has been our slavery, post-emancipation, and post-independence experience. I like that. He's playing it in the background, war. In the case of the Caribbean, my focus this afternoon, planters feared that if enslaved people became educated, they would want to liberate themselves from the oppressive systems of their colonial regime. 19th and early 20th century missionaries placated the enslavers by using religion to socialize the enslaved into submission to planter power. Curricula were designed to impart values of obedience, hard work, and acceptance of oppression. Even a brief survey of the intention of colonial education in the British Empire will reveal that colonial education was structured since the 19th century to maintain class divisions and to narrow opportunities for such mobility, for upward mobility. The model of the British colonized Caribbean's system of education is attributed principally to the philosophical basis of the Platonic ideal, with its stress on inherited inequality and differing capacities for performing appropriate social functions. And this philosophical source supported a stratified society and education for leadership. But the project to change from colonial and neo-colonial education to a more liberating narrative of self has been our post-liberation mission. At all levels of the education system, textbooks have been rewritten to include content that will bring pride to our race. Curricula have been changed, teachers have been retrained, and memorialization of our own icons has been done. The project is not complete, yes, we agree on that. It is a work in action, but the commitment is everlasting because the racist content of the inheritance needs to be destabilized. The elimination of the legacies of conquest, colonization, and colonialism has not been without its challenges. not least because of the stickiness of classism and racial discrimination. You heard that I am one of the vice chairs of the oldest UN treaty body now, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And so I'm quite aware of the importance of using all strategies, including education, to eliminate the scourge of systemic racism, inequity, and structural discrimination from the global community. I just wanted to screen Article 1 of the CERD, which defines racial discrimination, so that you can see what we work with when we examine states, when they have an interactive dialogue with us, and you can see it there for yourself. Any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, and it continues. Article 5 lays out the obligation of states to respect the social and economic rights of marginalized and racialized groups. Against this background, my response to the issues before us is to use the empirical example of the University of the West Indies to illustrate how a university in the Americas is dealing with social inclusion, diversity, and educational access for all, including those traditionally left behind and discriminated against. It is a fact that many universities have managed to demonstrate the importance of a social justice agenda in their teaching and learning processes and in the production of students and staff who are scholar activists. Professor Emerita of the University of the West Indies, Luz Longsworth, captures a fundamental and critical mandate of the activist university rather well when she made this speech some time ago at the university, when she said, a university must demonstrate its activism not only in public advocacy, but also in its teaching and learning, in ethical interactions, and in its global engagement. For the University of the West Indies, this is a strategic imperative. It's not just an activity, it's a commitment. And it was that strategic imperative demonstrated in teaching and learning at the University of the West Indies after its establishment in 1948, which identified it as a university engaged in education for transformation of a people grappling with the diseases of colonialism and its continuing legacies. The new Vice Chancellor came up with a strategy which he called the AAA strategy. And the AAA strategy is simple. It's the 3 A's: access, alignment, and agility. So according to this AAA strategy, wealth creation and reduction of social inequality through greater and more affordable access, efficient and effective alignment with society and economy, and then enhanced agility in pursuit of opportunities are the strategic goals residing in the plan's core, or at the plan's core. Agility also includes the desire to expand the physical presence of the UWI, and that's evident today because I think we have centers in almost all continents. We have one in South Africa, I think at this university, this very university, I think. And yes, our plans, like all plans, went astray a little bit after COVID-19. I think every university was affected. Students couldn't afford the fees and so on. But the Vice Chancellor and all staff, and of course our governments in the CARICOM, have come up with ways in which to see if we can still ensure that the University of the West Indies doesn't return to the days of elitism, but that we find a way in conformity with the desire of at least 2 or 4 vice chancellors who are from the peasantry. The late icon, Jamaican icon Rex Nettleford, and of course this vice chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, both from the peasantry, who are intent on seeking ways to fund university education for marginalized groups. And the marginalized groups are not only people of African descent from certain class and rural communities and so on. But we're talking about indigenous peoples who have been marginalized so many times over and over by different groups of people. So we now give scholarships to Kalinago people, to Taino people, to Maroons, to ensure that we become inclusive, to Maya, Garifuna, and so on. University academics have also been a part of this struggle, especially the history department. It's the history department, I think, which has been in the forefront of destabilizing the inherited myths and stereotypes that we got in the early education. And they have tried to destabilize, these myths and stereotypes and to dethrone the old Eurocentric absolutisms, writing texts to address the roots of racism and not just towards social justice. They have the responsibility of decolonizing education and creating more liberating narratives of self. And this has long been a necessary project in the Caribbean because, as the late Guyanese historian Elsa Govaya warned from the 1950s, and I quote from her, "In a region such as ours, that's the Caribbean, where shame about the past too often fills the place that should be held by knowledge, knowledge of the past must play its part in our liberation from the bonds of the past." The UWI, through the history departments, has really made a contribution to the essential project of mental liberation from the shackles of slavery and colonialism. History, of course, possesses one of the greatest possibilities for anchoring people emerging from a colonial past to a more positive beginning, helping all of us to deal with the epistemic violence of the imperial project and providing alternative words for the unbridled, indecent colonial bad words and deeds of early writers. And how have we done this? So we have taken the books we inherited and, building on the work of pioneer historians, we have gone back to the archives. Our archives have been so important. And I think in all post-colonial societies, we realize that one thing you don't do is throw out the archives you inherited, because in those archives lie the proof of what colonialism was like. So building on the examples of the pioneer, historians, many trained at the UWI in the post-independence era, sought to carry out Marcus Garvey's and Bob Marley's charge that in liberating ourselves from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. Many in the post-colonial era saw the possibility of using history as an emancipatory tool, perhaps because in Marcus Garvey's concept, history is a landmark, and you heard it before when I was being introduced. I really believe in this. It's a landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. And so every theme that you can think about has been turned on its head, turned sideways, upside down. And I'll just give you an example from the work that has been going on since the 1970s, I admit, on gender. Because actually, when I went to school and studied history, I was told that women worked only in the domestic sphere. They were only in the house, rearing children, sometimes for black men, but most times for the colonizers. But as I delved into the archives, I realized that even though women were like 30% of those trafficked to the region, they were overwhelmingly placed in field work. So they did two kinds of labor or sometimes at the same time. Having children to, especially after 1807, when the Abolition Act was passed, and planters were afraid that the population wouldn't keep up with the demands. But also they were overwhelmingly placed in all the gangs on the plantation. First gang, second gang, third gang. So we had to overturn those stereotypes to give women their rightful place in the development of our society. The second example I want to give is the issue of freedom. emancipation, the coming of emancipation, the abolition of the trafficking, and so on. Because I don't know about you who studied Caribbean history, but we learned about Wilberforce and people like Wilberforce and the women who boycotted sugar in their tea and all of that. But as you get back to the archives and also engage in oral history, you realize the names of all the men and women who led the protests in the Caribbean and in the Global South. And so we have tried to ensure that we teach our children those names. And they're now easier to come by because a lot of documents are now online, so we can go. The other thing we have been doing at the university is to look at our landscape. So we're not only engaging in decolonization in the post-independence period by rewriting texts and reinterpreting what we have seen in the archives and what we inherited. We are putting on the landscapes monuments that speak to who are the people who were there before us. And so the history and heritage advocates right across the University of the West Indies, and there are 5 campuses now spread across the University of the West Indies, they have been looking into their history to see what they can do to reshape the landscape. So remember, the university was established in 1948, and the first chancellor was Princess Alice, right? And now we have Professor Hilary Beckles, and before him, other Caribbean luminaries. And so we have looked at the names of complete decolonization mission on the landscape by renaming Queensway, because the major entrance to the university is still called not even just Queensway, the Queensway. And we're asking him to call it Freedom Way. So we'll see what happens. I'll see there's a letter waiting for me when I get back. And these monuments, maybe modest, maybe they're not, not that impressive, but still, that's what the Heritage Committee could afford. And these are, modest obelisks, but what we have tried to do is to find the names of the population, the last set of Africans who would have worked on the campus, because several of the campuses are former plantations. And so we managed to put the names, if we could look at yes, so these are other monuments. Those 2 are from Barbados. You can see the Ghanaian influence in Barbados. That's the administrative building where the principal has his office. So that's in the shape of the golden stool. I don't know if Ghana would be impressed, but it's as close as the architect came. And then that's one enslaved African whose history they found, who had occupied somewhere on the Barbados campus, the Cavell campus. And here is a monument hastily put together because a new building was being built on the Mona campus, and some bones began to come up from the ground. I don't know how I get myself placed in this history, but I was in my office minding my own business, and the phone started to ring, and people started to run into my office and say, Prof, come, some bones are coming up, and the people want to rebury the bones because they don't want to hold up the construction. So I left what I was doing, and I went over there, and I said, stop. I didn't even realize they would stop, because, who am I, But we called the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, the History Department, the Archaeological Unit. They came across and they ensured that something was done to preserve and to actually get the bones up, take them to the archaeology lab, and I think someone had to go abroad to see how old they were and so on. But they were digging right where the village of enslaved people was located on that campus. So it stands to reason that there were bones of enslaved Africans buried in that area. So there's a monument now on the spot They did get their building up, but at least we preserve some remnants. I also wanted to say that the UWI, in our schools and in our universities, we try to engage in what we call the transformative power of education. And there are kind of 7, maybe 12 principles of transformative education, which I wanted you to just see. Well, okay, if you could just go back to that. I've forgotten this one. This, you couldn't really see the names on the monuments, but I just extracted some of them from the archives. These are some of the enslaved Africans who lived on the Mona campus. I don't think you will see any, are there any African names there? I don't think so. But they lost their names. Their names were taken away and they were given other names. So, yes, so the 12 main principles of transformative education we tried to popularize so that we can know that we're engaging in transformative education. I just want to say 2 other things. One is that the University of the West Indies faculty all members of the faculty try to engage in advocacy. The University of the West Indies, especially Caribbean historians, have not all imprisoned. I'm not saying everybody is perfect and everybody's out there. Some people don't like to go there. But many of us, we have refused to imprison ourselves within the walls of academia. And so we have joined other universities that have gone outside the walls of academia to meet the needs of the societies in which we are located. Because right next to the University of the West Indies is a very poor community. We couldn't just be an ivory tower there and ignore what's happening in Augustown, which is a town called Augustown because of freedom in August 1834 and 38. So some of us have become what I think Walter Rodney, whose name you would know, described as revolutionary intellectuals. And so we shunned the ivory tower classic intellectual model to become relevant to the community. And one of the things the university has done also, and you heard from the CV that I am the first director of the Center for Reparation and Research. So that has been established. That was established in 2017 as part of what CARICOM heads decided, that they would establish a CARICOM Reparation Commission. And a CARICOM Reparation Commission needed a center dedicated to research that would provide the information and the justification for why we do what we do. So this is the regional headquarters of the University of the West Indies. It's really the regional headquarters. So this is the seat of the Vice Chancellor, and there's an office there for the Center for Reparation and Research. And what we try to do is to go out to communities. We go out to schools. Here's some of our student outreach. We go to the high schools, because on the syllabus of the high levels in the or we call them the sixth formers, the history syllabus now has 2 topics that are important to both our societies: reparation for the Caribbean for historic wrongs, but we also have paid attention to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here. I also wanted to say that I should have said before that advocacy is not only going out into communities, but looking into the university itself. I mentioned the streets and so on, but one important thing I should tell you is that, and those from Trinidad and Tobago will appreciate this, there was a hall, I don't know about this university, but the students live on campus, many of them, and there are these halls of residence, and one in Trinidad and Tobago is called Milner Hall. That, I think the name was given in 1927. Everybody, I think it's a male hall, and I mean, generations have gone there. And then somebody in this reparatory justice environment, people started to do research, more research. and discovered that Milner was actually a British governor in South Africa. And at some point, I think 1927 is when the hall got that name. He was apparently sent to Trinidad and Tobago there's a school of imperial and tropical medicine there. And he was supposed to learn about tropical products and farming, and then to go back to instruct people who were stealing land. In Jamaica, we say we thief land. And colonize and conquer people's place. So we thought, no, we just can't. We cannot have Milner Hall. So it's now Freedom Hall. Clap Trinidad and Tobago and the students there. So coming back to our advocacy, if we could just screen those. So we have gone to high schools to help them to understand the new syllabus, which is supposed to look at Ghana's independence, truth and reconciliation, the anti-apartheid struggle, and why we're into reparation. We go to maroon communities because, they're disparaged sometimes in some of our communities. People don't even think that there are maroons around the place, but they look like us. So how would you be able to distinguish, People think they look somehow different. And every year they have a big ceremony at Akampong, and this year's truly, I don't remember what I was saying there. Something useful, I think. And so if we could just go to, yes, and these are some of the publications. The one in the middle is very important because it helps them with the module on the syllabus. So it's Introduction to Reparation for Secondary Schools, and that was done by the Center for Reparation Research. So why do we do what we do? Well, the next slide, okay, so these are other people with whom we are. The Special Rapporteur for Racism, actually, and for Indigenous People's Rights, they visit the center, and we have dialogue with them so that we can know and share what we are doing and what they are doing. So the Durban Declaration and Program of Action is so important as blueprint for what we do and why we do what we do. 2001, you all know about the Durban Anti-Racism Conference. Many people boycotted it, countries boycotted it, okay. But the DDPA is strong and supported by enough people, enough countries. And we use it because really it talks about historical injustices and the link between historical injustices and the status of people today. And we have to make reparation advocacy relevant. People can't just think it's something about the past alone. They have to see that the legacies are enduring so that they join the fight. And then, of course, Sir Arthur Lewis of St. Lucia and Sir Ellis Clark of Trinidad and Tobago. Ellis Clark in 1964, Sir Arthur Lewis way back in 1939, believed that you can't just have countries come into your country, take over your people, your resources, and then, yes, we struggle for independence, and then they just get away. And so this is, I really use this all the time because it is true that an administering power is not entitled to extract for centuries all that can be got out of a colony, and when that has been done, to relieve itself of its obligations by the conferment of a formal but meaningless because it cannot possibly be supported, political independence. Justice requires that reparation be made to the country that has suffered the ravages of colonialism before that country is expected to face up to the problems and difficulties that will inevitably beset it upon independence. So, to conclude, I've tried to demonstrate the ways in which the transformative power of history education and decolonial education has been used for the benefit of the people of the Caribbean and its diaspora. This is not to exclude other disciplines, but as the great late Nelson Mandela has told us, it is always important to look at your history. You cannot really be proud of yourself if you do not know your history. And the right excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey told us that history, and you heard me say this over and over, is the landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. Well, the late Rex Dentleford put it more simply. He said, you can't drive without a rear view mirror. Try it and you'll crash. So he was just illustrating the importance of history. And of course, the Trinidadian American Dr. Maya Angelou, now an ancestor, has long said that the more you know of your history, the more liberated you are. If there is any chance that we will successfully navigate our current challenges and secure our collective futures, we must first ask of ourselves these questions and note these ideas as Rama Subramanian directs, and I have the quote up there. How must we reimagine the process, provision, and purpose of education in such a way that it upholds the rights of all citizens for whom it is intended, engenders sustainable development, and ultimately achieves knowledge of self? Education must offer society the possibility of understanding itself in new ways through which it then is able to actively aspire to and shape its future. Education must as well, through the provision and its quality, become an enabling environment for social justice and inclusion. In the final analysis, only a history that reverses centuries of myths and stereotypes can restore pride and dignity to Africans and people of African descent and any marginalized group of people. The change making is in our hands. Are we ready to become or continue to follow the path of change makers? I hope so. There are many examples to follow. Every country has examples. Queen Nzinga, Ya Asantewa, Queen Nanny of the Jamaican Maroon, Chief Tachi of the 1760 war in Jamaica, Kofi of the 1763 war in Berbice, now Guyana, part of Guyana, Boukman Duty, Cecile Fatiman, Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines of the Haitian Revolution, Boussa of the 1860 war in Barbados, Sam Sharp and Eliza Whittingham of the 1831-32 Emancipation War in Jamaica, Kwamina and King Court of Antigua Barbuda, Mary Seacole, Mary Prince, Olaudah Equiano, Ignatius Sancho, Paul Bogle, and Letitia Gohagan. These latter ones were murdered in October 1865 in the Morant Bay War, at the directive of English Governor Edward John Eyre. And in the modern era, of course, we have Marcus Garvey, C.L.R. James, Walter Rodney, Nelson and Winnie Mandela, Bernie Grant, Sir Arthur Lewis, Kwame Nkrumah, Elsa Kavai, and the list goes on and on and on. Change makers must reclaim Black history and destabilize the philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior. I end with Vice Chancellor Professor Hilary Beckles' words and Mandela's words. First, Hilary Beckles. Fine universities are not established and funded to serve themselves, but to commit to engage the challenges facing their host communities. In this regard, the primary mandate of the University of the West Indies is to serve in the advancement of the Caribbean community and sustain its development. And this mission continues. Yes, truly, as Tata Madiba said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Shepherd. I am not going to speak for over long because I want to open to questions from the audience. But I just want to pull up a few points, and perhaps extend to some figures that I think would be interesting to think with here. So this inextricable link between reparation, decolonization, education, and the archives is so vital, I think, for those of us here, meaning here in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and in fact, everywhere, given this moment, but given any moment in time. It seems that I was thinking on the way today how precarious this moment feels, and saying to myself, but every generation in some ways feels that. And the question then becomes, what is the question of our times? And what is the work that we have to do? And I find so striking this connection between reparations, decolonization, education, and the archives. And thinking with the Caribbean and South Africa and the global South, I'm just gonna speak of these two. There's a figure who I found in the archives who is still nameless in the archives, because again, to that point that so many of these figures are actually found in the archive documents of quote unquote important people, right? The big men. And it's a Grenadian woman, so from Grenada in the Caribbean, who came to South Africa in 1923 and was blocked from getting off the boat in South Africa and was helped by someone by the name of Sol Blaikie. Right? Then we have this fact that some of us know, some of us may not know. The UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, started by Marcus Garvey. Its largest branch outside of the United States was where? Cape Town. There is a collection of short stories, because I'm a literary historian, so it always comes back to literature. But there's a collection of stories by a Guyanese Barbadian writer who finds himself in the US during the Harlem Renaissance, works for the UNIA's newspaper, The Negro World, worked in the Panama Canal. And he has a collection that comes out in 1926 by the name of Tropic Death. And most of those stories are about Caribbean migration to Panama. But there's one that is about migration to South Africa. And the main character, and I'm connecting to this renaming space, the Queen's Highway on Mona campus, the last standing. There's the King's Highway in this short story. And the character who's the protagonist in this short story is actually the descendant of a white planting family, as in plantation family, in Barbados, who is returning to Barbados after the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. And in returning to Barbados, so here we have this connection between South Africa and the Caribbean that's actually very much about the circulation of capital and the circulation of colonial power through figures including Milner. This character who returns, and on his way to his family's, what was a plantation that's relatively derelict, meets a woman who tries to tell him, be careful on the road. And he says, but this is the King's Highway. I'm fine on the King's Highway. And she says, you have to be careful, look out for duppies, right? Ghosts. He goes, continues on his way. And I have students, former students in here who have taught this story, and the story's in Bajan vernacular because Walron believed in writing in the vernacular. And this portion of it happens in the vernacular, and he goes on the road and finds what he thinks is a baby. By the morning, there's a young girl who's responsible for cleaning the cabin who comes. He's dead, and the blanket with the baby is empty. Be careful of the duppies. That was the warning that he failed to listen to. But there's something about that story. So the idea, the title of the story is The Vampire Bat, that the baby was actually a vampire bat, right? Appearing as a baby, but having another kind of power that actually relies on local knowledge, right? A kind of other cosmology. And here we have this struggle that's between the idea of the king's power, right? The king's highway, the king's power to control that route in the colonies, and yet a kind of pushback that refuses to be controlled. And some of these things, just the fact that that story exists, where you have it opening with this man who's coming off a boat where he's fought in South Africa and been part in a way of a kind of, if that war produced nothing, it produced a particular version of an amalgam of a kind of white capital that didn't quite know how to let everyone else in or want to let everyone else in. And here it is, we then come to our present when that had to let everyone in, right? Because democracy doesn't quite happen in 1910. In fact, there's a rollback to rights to the vote in South Africa for people who are not white, because there was something called the qualified non-racial franchise. But these connections that exist in our archives, a story that is fictional but is actually telling us about something in our history that we don't always have access to or teach, that there was this connection, and we need to understand how capital was connected, how colonial power and imperial power connected. What did it do in these different places? Where did Milner go over different points in his life? Where did someone like Glenn Gray go over different points in his life? There's one historian who talks about colonial agents sort of officers starting off in India, then moving to the Caribbean, then moving to Africa. But also these other figures who exist in quote-unquote powerful men's archives and papers, who we need to get access to, and who we need to imagine into being if we can't always get access to their full records. So this possibility that I hope we will continue in terms of how we think about the Caribbean, how we think about South Africa, how we think about the Global South, and how we think them together and understand the connections and the ways in which we make sense of our present. We also need to make sense of our past collectively. I think it's so powerful how we bring then the reparation of the damages of those moments that often defy our current national boundaries or regional boundaries, and make sense of an education, offer an education that helps us to do that, that gives us the methodologies, the critical thinking practices to be able to do that. And I just want to thank you, Professor Shepherd, for giving us that. It's quite powerful. So I'll stop there and open for questions.
Okay.
While everybody's fighting over themselves to ask a question, you know, this is so interesting what you just said. Two things struck me. You picked out Tropic Death, Eric Waldron, as the author, right? Eric Waldron was Lucille Mathurin Mayer's father. And she met him on the steps of the British Library in the UK. And having written the biography of Lucille Mathurin Mayer, I found out all about Eric Waldron. And I often wondered, what was the symbolism of meeting on the steps of the British Library? And then you made this connection between archives and empire and reparation and all of that. I just thought it was really a surreal moment of connection and what Lucille Mathurin Mayer became as a result of the late recognition, of course, of her father's work and so on. It was amazing. And then my other question is based on what you just said. What made these men, because they were mostly governors, male, I don't think we heard of a woman governor in the time of the history I studied. But what made them circulate, but when they are in the Caribbean, become so brutal? I have to ask myself that, because I think of Governor Edward Eyre. He was in other places before he ended up in Jamaica in the 1860s. That was his last posting. And at his bidding, over 400 people were murdered. Is it that the Caribbean represented this pace of brutality where people said, we cannot endure it? And therefore, it's a place of constant protest, and therefore more and more ways to find effective suppression. You know? And the final point, so interesting your comments. They can no longer stop us from looking at the archives. Remember, we can read and write and more. We can travel, even though when we ask back for our things, they say we can't preserve them. The AC not, is it low or high? Low enough, it's not cold enough in our archives, so they cannot return the paper. But hello, it's not paper anymore. Digitization has made it possible. We don't even have to go anywhere. We can stay at home, get on the computer, and read everything that we need to have a global reparatory justice movement. That's the only thing that will shift it. Okay, that's me.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for acknowledging Juneteenth. I want to thank my sister Kai for inviting me, because I didn't know I would be here, but I'm here. And I see my auntie Barbara and my neighbor Donna. So here we are, synchronistically, serendipitously, in this not so full room. And that's what's giving me anxiety, is that I'm recording this conversation and I'm rushing out of here to pick up my 12-year-old daughter at school, and she needs to hear this. And I live down the road. I vote down the road. And Kingsway, UJ Kingsway, is down the road. Just, where are we today? How are we bringing the archive into present? My name is Khaironisa Galeta. I'm the daughter of Hotep Idris Galeta, late South African jazz musician who traveled to the United States long before I was born. Met my mother, Muslima Lewis, in New York, Black American, and they had me. In 2010, I moved here. when I met Kai. I've been here ever since. In 2012, I had a daughter, the one that I'm picking up from school. And I named her Sila Galeta because when I was pregnant, I was listening to a Rastafarian chant with Mortimer Plano, and I said, this Sila, this word is making me feel very calm in a very turbulent point. So somehow my life traces the triangle. But also bringing things to present, I look down the road at Kingsway, at the precinct where I voted. This is my ward, my section of the city where I vote in South Africa. I'm not talking about those other people I vote for in the US. So I voted a few weeks ago, and when I showed up, I said, something's different here, because the queue was longer. I didn't mind standing in the queue. But our precinct changed power in my ward. The election results came out on a Friday. Right now, we have no ward councillor. So I'm not sure what made her resign. I saw her resignation letter. But that particular party thought they had this ward on lock. But somehow the change of power is scary. I don't know why it's scary, because we've been through enough as a country in the past 8 years in Joburg to have real things to be afraid of. So my question is this. Oh, and also I'm privileged enough to have gone to a very lovely institution called Spelman College, where a lot of these names that you're naming, I learned about 25 years ago when I entered the institution. That's a privilege and a blessing that I carry. My child goes to a private Anglican school across the road, down the road, all girls, that ironically reminded my black, queer, gay Jamaican colleague who went to Jamaica College. When he went on that campus, he said, I'm getting traumatized because this is like copy-paste, like they made the one school and then just copy-paste. It looks like Jamaica College, but it's in Joburg. This looks like Kingston. How does it look like Kingston? So again, copy-paste, colonialism, copy-paste. What do we do now with all this copy-paste? So I'm picking up my daughter, who, based on her community, based on herself, based on her identity, knows who she is. And the school is doing what it's doing. But what happens when, you know, that slide that you're saying about what is racial discrimination, that UN definition, what's tending to happen in this country and in others is that you have white people that are now saying, that applies to me. I'm afraid this is racism against me. You wanting these names on these streets is threatening me. I'm gonna go to Canada. I'm gonna go to New Zealand because I can't get a job in South Africa. It's unsafe for me here. I'm under threat. So as we are pushing this decolonial agenda, and as we're pushing it, as I am, with love, with pride, with acknowledgement of history, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to be angry. I'm very quickly labeled someone who's angry. I'm not angry. But when I just point out facts, and you are bristling because you don't want that name there, and it's making me feel unsafe, so I'm gonna go to New Zealand now, or you're in the US and now we can't talk about DEI because it's threatening all the white people. What do we do then? Thank you.
Come to Jamaica and feel all right.
Sila.
But I have to say, Sila's mom.
That's all who I am.
And I knew Mortimer Plano, actually. The teacher of Rastafari. But you're just describing the sameness of colonialism. It's the sameness. We just have to be the change we want to see, however long it takes. And I think we have to try to get everyone to understand that the fact that I'm fighting for my rights don't mean I want to deny you yours. I would like my rights because I've denied been denied my rights for so long. And I think that's the challenge of the post-independence, post-colonial period. We have to find a way to talk together and say, this is untenable. We can't live like this. And I think people of South Africa have also said that. People of Jamaica said that. The people of Trinidad and Tobago said that. But because people will not accept difference in an egalitarian way, this is going to keep happening over and over and over again. So I can't offer you a solution that is easy. JC, Jamaica College, is on my radar. I don't have to live this life, you know. I could live a simpler life. Go with my little puppy out in the little shed have my coffee in the morning, drink wine in the evening, and feel all right and feel airy. But I cannot allow Jamaica College to carry on the way it is carrying on, so it's on my radar. I have been there because the buildings have colonial names. They were started by enslavers. But one of the photos you saw there was of my office, the staff, they're going there to try to negotiate with them to ensure that they recognize their history and do something about it. So the schools are on my radar. I'm happy to say that while Monroe College, which is another one, will not dig up the enslaver from the chapel, at least the sister school Hampton, started by the same money from the same enslavers, put up a plaque recently to honor the enslaved Africans whose names I sent there to say, no, you can't tell me you don't know. Now you know. Do something about it. Appleton Estate, all of you drink Appleton rum and Campari. The center, forced them to build a monument because Appleton rum did not just emerge out of a spring without any hands. So if you go online and look at the monument, which is a part of the rum tour now, I can rest a little easier at night.
Okay, hi. I'm Donna.
Hi, Donna.
I moved to South Africa from Jamaica 24 years ago, and I must confess I don't really keep up with happenings. Life here is full-time, you know, so I'm not able to keep up as much. I wanted to ask about the role of language in the decolonization of education. And I know that in Jamaica there was a project around recognizing Patois
nation language
as an official language. To be honest, I'm not sure where that reached.
Okay.
And I want to ask you, what are the implications of making Patois an official language for education?
Okay.
And for official documents, for example. Yeah.
It is, so we call it a nation language because Patois is really not empowering. It's a nation language. Let's give it, we try to give it some respect by saying it's a real language. It's not broken English. It's a real language. I can't understand half of the languages I hear here. So we're trying to say to our people in Jamaica, multilingualism is the ideal. Don't denigrate any language. Teach the nation language and teach English language against the nation language. In the same way some people learn French or Spanish against English. So a lot of the children are being excluded from quality education because they do not understand English language. That's not what they speak at home. And so Professor Caroline Cooper is one of those stalwart women professors out there writing in the newspaper in the nation language. She uses 3 forms of the language. So she writes in the English language, then she writes in the Jamaican nation language. It has its own syntax, it has its own dictionary, And then she does a combination which she called chaka chaka spelling, for those who find that easier to read. We have to keep insisting that a part of the decolonization mission is to bring pride to our people. Because if you continue to denigrate the nation language and you don't teach English against it, some children will forever be at the bottom of the ladder. They won't pass any exams, and they won't be able to go anywhere. And so it's a fight that we still have. But I have to say classism is still strong, and even racism in our societies. The fact that everybody, almost everybody look alike, doesn't mean there's not discrimination. And so we have to fight against that, and we continue to do that. So the mission is still there. It's still ongoing. We've reached far, though, you know, because there are books now, Bible written in nation language, books written in nation language, and more people are supporting Carlin Cooper in her one-woman fight. It's more than one woman now, but, you know, she's in the forefront. So not there yet, but it's a process that is ongoing.
Thank you. My name is Tapelo. I am a postdoc at JIAS. So, Prof, I wish to talk to you or ask you about colonial plants and animals that we've made part of our African spirituality, our everyday lifestyle. For example, pap, it's not indigenous to Africa.
What?
Pap. I don't know if you know.
Pap.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Polenta, Italian.
Yes.
Pap, South African.
Polenta.
Yes.
yes.
So that's one example. Mm-hmm. And a very short anecdote in my hometown in the Free State. So the Free State, it's a central province of South Africa, in South Africa, if I were to put it that way, and it's the food basket of the whole country. The number one maize supply of the whole country, South Africa. So one instance, there was an Australian company that went to my hometown to chop down southern blue gum, a tree called southern blue gum, Eucalyptus bicostata, it's the scientific name. And everyone in the community was angry and mad and disappointed, because their point was, these trees have been planted here almost 100 years ago. They are part of who we are. They're part of our culture. But now that we know there are many colonial plants and animals, food, artifacts that we've made part of our lifestyle, part of our daily living, how do we continue to live with that now that we know? Because chances are we didn't know that pap is not indigenous to Africa. We didn't know about the elephant, the giraffe, but we love them. In South Africa, we can only talk about the big five. I don't know if you know what the big fives are.
My friends went to see the big five today. I don't know if they saw it.
Yes.
Did you see? Huh? Oh, it's tomorrow you're going to see the big five. Okay.
So those are indigenous to South Africa.
They know what that is.
Yes. So the long and short of it is that now that we know, how do we continue to live with I guess it's part of the colonial legacy, if you want to call it that. Should we call it a positive colonial legacy, or what do we call it? And how do we continue to live with that knowledge that now that we know what is indigenous to us, what is not indigenous to us, from plants to animals to food to artifacts that are very much part of our identity as Africans. Africans in Africa, Africans in the diaspora.
I don't mean to laugh, but you're giving me visions of the animals being deported. Listen. I said in my talk, colonialism has changed, in fact, in some cases, disfigured our societies. But where we are now, I don't think many of us can return to a pure state of pre-colonial existence. So if it's not going to do violence to our souls or health, I say, they always say in Jamaica, take the bitter with the sweet, if you can coexist like that. If there's no damage you can't say, well, I'm not going to have pap because it came from somewhere else. In our part of the world, a lot of the foods that we have came from other places. The enslaved Africans, the food that was introduced, some came from Africa. The ackee that we like so much today came from Ghana. The codfish that goes with the ackee dish came from North America. The rice, we didn't plant any rice. We don't plant rice. Well, some of the indentured Indians did introduce rice, like in Guyana, I think, but not so much in Jamaica. There was some experiment, but we import rice. I think the important thing is to embrace the diversity that we have. What we are not going to embrace is the hierarchizing. And if you can find the Bob Marley for me, I'll be grateful. We can play it at the end. It is really something to live by now until the philosophy, that whole, whether it's a race or a people or a class, superior and inferior. I say what we want are equitable societies where there's respect for each other, where there's no saying, well, your food is poor people food, and this food is rich people food. Eat what you like, what you can afford, and let's get on with the business of ensuring that we have equity and respect for our multicultural societies. Because for us in Jamaica to go back, how many years since independence? 62, and 200 and odd since slavery, go back to eating only what the indigenous people, I don't think is realistic, to be honest with you. What we don't want is if the Kalinago and the Taino people say our staple diet is this, people don't start to think, oh, well, why don't you buy white rice? Because white rice might do more damage to their health than the food that they are growing and planting in their communities. Respect is what I think we need. I don't know how else to answer you, my brother. Sorry.
So, thank you very much, Professor Shepherd, for a really excellent presentation. And I like how Nisa started out in terms of placing herself, so I'm going to also place myself. So I am a detribalized Trinidadian American with footsteps in Mozambique and also in South Africa. I place myself here today as a friend of Dr. Collis Buthelezi and also the Jamaican High Commission. I'm really interested there are a couple of things that you said, so I took some notes, and I'm starting off with the very last thing you said, and you said, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior. And your approach is in destabilizing this philosophy. And you use the word decolonization and education. So my question to you is, when we look at this, because you've given us the historical approach, what approach are you using in terms of destabilizing, canceling, or balancing the Western episteme in terms of a pedagogical grounding around education? I.e., I say that because Dr. Buthelezi spoke about local knowledge. How do we make sense in the world? If I look at South Africa where I live, and my research as a PhD student is looking at Ubuntu pedagogy and looking at constructivism, is there a particular approach that you're using in terms of unpacking what education means, or how are you going to unpack education or the teaching, the pedagogy in Jamaica? That's what I'm interested in. And thank you for a fabulous discussion.
Thank you very much for the question. You see, I've been watching the destabilization that is going on in the United States of America and to some extent in the UK. I look at the way in which terms and words are being attacked. Apparently, I'm not supposed to say chattel enslavement or slavery anymore. I must say involuntary labor. I will not, never. And I don't care whether it's the palaces or wherever I go, I will say chattel enslavement. Nobody can force me to say involuntary labor. How can it be involuntary when people scrape you up from your community and take it to another place. How my mother and my mother's generation came to be in Jamaica, because before she died, I decided to, do the DNA. On my mother's side, generations back, we're from Cameroon. And I want to go there next year to see where the Tikar people live. One thing before I die, I just need to see that place. The point is, from what all of I have said, what you should gather is that since 1948 at the University of the West Indies, and since independence in the 1960s for most of our CARICOM countries, well, Haiti decided to take it from 1793, and then 1804, their independence. They're suffering for it, but they are still standing, despite the destabilization that's going on. You have to know yourself. What is it that who am I? And how am I going to live in this world? How am I going to educate my children? And that has to be settled. And I think we kind of settled that by saying we have to destabilize the Western philosophy that is telling us that some food inferior than other food, that some color inferior to other color, that some hairstyle, like Bantu knots, must not be worn, or Rastafari locks must not be worn in the school, they must shave it off, that some monuments on the landscape better than other monuments. This is the Western episteme that you're talking about, and we are saying, and thanks to Rastafari, I'm telling you, Rastafari, they have taught us, kicking and screaming maybe, to understand self, the I, that I. What do you want to be? Who are we? And what is our culture that we must embrace? And that's where I stand. So English language is there as a utility. I don't want to be trapped in one place where I only speak one language and I can't go on the international stage. I want to be at the UN, and if it means I have to learn Spanish, French, English, okay. When I'm with my Jamaican people, I will talk the Jamaican nation language. I'm not going to be confined by what other people's ideas are about me. And therefore, as a historian and as a trained teacher, my responsibility to my students and to my nation, and you heard that I had talking history for 12 years. I don't know what the hell I did that. Sorry. Was it a curse word? Anyway. But it was a mission, eh? It was a mission to say, this is the history, this is our history. This is what you must embrace. Learn other histories, because we're not, we're an island, but we don't have to live only on that island. Embrace multilingualism, multiculturalism, but be grounded in pride in self and in one's culture. So I don't care what they call it. Since I've been studying, I've heard about so many theories, so many philosophies, so many ideas and ideologies that I'm supposed to learn. I hear them, I read about them, but then I come to my own conclusion about what I want to be, how I want my hair to look, the freedom to dress it any way I want. See, I'm having a Zulu hat right now. I have geles from Nigeria, clothes, I think, isn't it South African style? Yeah. Osa. I claim the right to be a citizen of the world, but anchored in my own reality in the Caribbean. And there is no inferiority. So I know what they're teaching in school. You mustn't pay attention to critical thinking. That's what I'm hearing out of the United States. Don't say slavery. And the commission report in the UK some years ago said, we must not only teach that slavery was bad. What on earth was good about slavery? Nothing. So sometimes these are academic things you have to do to get your PhD. I did what I had to do to get my PhD, but after that I abandoned it and did what I want to do and how I want to shape that knowledge. Cambridge was a necessity, you know. I know people, oh, you went to Cambridge, miss? It was reparation. I couldn't afford to go to Cambridge. Give me a scholarship. I'm not saying thank you. I'm saying it's your responsibility. And I want more money to stay here. This is too little. I got what I wanted. Because I wasn't going around like I'm some, inferior person out in Cambridge at all. We have to demand our rights, what is our right. We need to open ourselves to the philosophies and so on, but we have to come to our center. And that's where I stand.
So we have 4 questions in the room. Can I ask we stop with those after the 4th? Can I also ask that we do them in a round? So if you can pose your question, pass the mic back to me and I'll take it down. And then any other questions, we will have to pick up the conversation later. My apologies, but.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a powerful lecture. My name's John Rowett, University of Oxford and Three Oceans Foundation. In terms of placement, I was central to setting up the Rex Nettleford Fellowship at UE.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to ask you a question about government. Mm-hmm. How far government is supporting the approach to education that you're describing, particularly in the light of the National Commission on Education that Orlando Patterson has headed, and also in the light of Prime Minister Holness announcing that Jamaica is to be a STEM island, not a STEAM island, a STEM island. How have you found support from government? How do you see government supporting you going forward? Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Shepherd, I'm just going to get the other 3.
Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate your lecture. And I'm enamored, actually, by the title of the lecture. And I shall ask 4 questions, and I can take them as
You're
one.
You're going to ask 4 questions?
Yeah,
is she going to allow you to do that?
Well, I'm going to put them in as one, actually. My name is Harold Campbell, and the name is one that speaks to the whole idea of decolonization. And I remember I went to London School to give a lecture on professor, and we all stood up, and people were waiting on the professor to come, because they couldn't find Harold Campbell, although I sat where my friend is sitting in the chair, but Campbell did not look right. Anyway, the question I wanted to find out, what's the discussion in Jamaica? I left Jamaica some 26 years ago, and I need to know what's the current discussion on our republic. Okay. And that's the one. The second one, which is tied to that, has to do, how are we so silent in Jamaica about what's happening in Cuba? I went to Cuba in 2018, and it's not fun. Really, it is not fun. It brought me back to living in Jamaica in the early 80s, when everybody were leaving, the 5 planes were leaving to Miami. And Cuba, that 2018, is not fun. And then again, it has to do with the shamble government in Haiti. Or are we silent on that? Very, very silent. But then again, the last question, the last sub-question is the loud silence on Gaza. And if you could speak to that for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shepherd. My question is based on not so much the decolonization of Western pedagogy, even though I don't exonerate the West and its colonial legacies. But I'm much more interested, maybe could speak on the legacies of the West and its impact on Black intellectuals, more especially in spaces where they find themselves has been very much full of Western history or Western supremacy. And as a Black scholar or Black intellectual that is in constant contact with certain students from different backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, and having to use tools and strategies in order to ensure the progression of the students, but at the same time, you want to show them that they can also be liberated other than just using the tools of the West. So I'm trying to say is, how do you as a Black intellectual mitigate the space of double consciousness in more like Western universities or universities that have a history of Western supremacy?
Oh, okay. Hello, Professor. I'm Atina Ngamso, and my question is
I'm trying
really
to see where the question. Oh,
here.
oh, okay. Oh, right.
Yeah. And I have like a lot of things going on in my mind, but one thing that struck me was in kind of the exchange between you and Professor Carlos Buthelezi, in the kind of like recognition and the lights that were going on, like, oh, and it was happening to me too. I went to a school that was called Kafrarian High School for Girls, Kafrarian meaning land of the Kafirs. At some point, I ended up going to a national thing and winning it, and then the government became aware of the school name and changed the name to Kingsridge High School for Girls. Being it that the Amatola mountain range in the Eastern Cape was known as the mountain range of the kings of the Xhosa. I went to Oxford and we put up a big fight coming from the South African Rhodes Must Fall moment. We had the same experience with Zimbabwean students, Zambian students, Caribbean students, American students, Burma students, Australian, New Zealand students. We all had the same lights going on, the same names. At Rhodes House in Oxford, where I went, there is a hall called Milner Hall, because Milner was part of the company of Rhodes and the genocideers that were transmuting, I guess, the slavetocracy in South Africa into what would become the new imperial colonial settler project, right? So I go back then to what Professor Carlos Buthelezi was saying at the beginning, which is that each generation has been in a time that seems as kind of precarious as this. And then I go and think about the moment of Pan-Africanism. I'm sure the same lights were going on for Du Bois as they were going on from Nkrumah, as they were going on for everyone from the Black world, which, for example, in academia, at least in South Africa, you can't officially constitute, right? Because our Black experiences are niche and special, and there is no link between us, and there was no slavery in South Africa. We're just colonized, and we still have our languages and our hats and our dresses. So we must be different from the Blacks who were kidnapped and forced to be slaves everywhere else in the world. So there's a kind of like deliberate obfuscation of our histories insofar as they are a global project. The slavetocracy is a global project, and everywhere where Black people were, they became slaves, vulnerable to capture, whether their displacement was on land or overseas, etc. But there's a way in which we're made kind of sometimes self-interestedly to cling onto our own context to make a career and a path and a body of work, etc. So my question is, I guess when you think about the ways in which the Caribbean world has collaborated, has deliberated, and come to what seems like a consensus on the question of reparations, how is this generation going to do things differently? I mean, is our education not the very thing which goes ahead of us and anticipates us for the white world, so that whatever education, we accumulate whatever accoutrements we're able to cling on to work and perpetuate the supremacy of whiteness all and throughout the world, where white people are present and where they are not.
Whoa.
I beg. There's one final question, no more. I'm sorry, but.
Thank you so much for allowing me to ask my question, and thank you, Pro, for such a divine presentation. My name is Stephanie Tilley. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm a proud HBCU, historically black college and university doctoral student, and so my question is regarding collaboration and solidarity amongst the black diaspora. How can we strengthen our ties and community as within the black diaspora when looking at decolonizing education within our own prospective environments and locations? We're dealing with systematic barriers, lack of resources, and if I'm honest, a misunderstanding of one another. For example, I'm here on a fellowship, and oftentimes my American identity is more acknowledged more so than my black identity. However, in my own community, I'm proudly black, I'm proudly Southern. So how can we go beyond systematic barriers and as well as perceived barriers and dark barriers within the black diaspora and work together to decolonize education?
Okay, thank you all for your questions. I'll start with the last one. No one, and certainly I don't think I did say this project is easy. It is not easy. Every day it's a struggle, and because we are not living in silos, because the world is so interconnected, because our economies are so controlled, because multinational corporations are in our spaces, because we have different schools, we have different institutions, because regardless of our effort to have one philosophy that guides our lives, it is not happening, and it has not happened. I don't want you to get the impression that the Caribbean is a space where we don't have everyday struggles, because we don't have one class, we don't have one ethnic group. Migration has, whether forced or voluntary, has made us multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-everything. So what I have tried to say is what scholars who think there must be another way to live, what we are doing to try to move towards that ideal. We're not there. It's a work in action. It's ongoing. And so I don't have any easy answer for you, because you feel a part of this society. But the way you speak, maybe the way you dress, I don't know, there are going to be differences that people recognize. The most you can do is have respect and try to live in this place that you have chosen to be your life for a few years, all right? The United States of America, especially the South, is a very difficult place. From my experience there, I had a fellowship at Charleston, in Charleston. I saw the legacies of enslavement and so on there. It is not easy, and you just have to every day try to negotiate your space. That's all I can say about that. There are people who resent the fact that you're not a migrant. You are a black woman who want to live in a black country, a predominantly black country, and you want to live among people with whom you can relate. But sometimes I think that we are gone too far in our separate ways to become this one. the only thing we can do is try on the ideological level to develop as people who have respect and who understand that colonialism disfigured us, and we're trying to work with other like-minded people to live a more respectful life. That's all I can offer there. Oxford. That's interesting that you did that. And I thank you for that. But we live in what people call a democracy, with political parties, and they're right now the third parties have never really worked in our country. So you do have what people call the two tribes. And every 5 years we have election. Sometimes one rules for 2 terms, sometimes 3. And so we have a regime in power now that really was going ahead with this STEM idea. I believe, though, that from what I'm hearing from the government of Jamaica right now, the government has been forced to recognize that they have to go full steam ahead. It can't be full steam ahead. And I've seen changes that are taking place. And I think the Patterson report, where Professor Patterson actually recommended compulsory history education, I think that, because the Prime Minister, the government put that commission together. And I have interviewed Professor Orlando Patterson. He has come to Jamaica, he has spoken to different audiences, and he has tried to popularize the report, to share the report. Like most commissions, the report will stay on some shelf, eventually. But right now, the big issue is, 1, compulsory history education, because children are growing up without a sense of who they are, and that is being drummed into the regime. And then the issue of not allowing this idea that science, technology, and mathematics, and engineering, that's all people, the children should aspire to. They have to have a balanced education and knowledge of self. So that is going on now. And I have to say I've seen some shifts in the Prime Minister's approach. Prof. Campbell, you have a whole heap of questions, boy. It's one with 4 parts. Okay, 1 play and 4 acts. I share with you, my friends and I share with you the agony over Cuba. Actually, we met each other because we taught at Jose Marti School in Jamaica, a gift from the Cuban government. And former President, the late President Fidel Castro actually visited the school. We all met him and exchanged a few words with him. We visited Cuba to see how the education system was organized there. And I think we are all committed comrades in that regard. And we lament what's happening in Cuba and the positioning of, I see, I don't know, what are they, warships? It reminds me of the gunboat diplomacy of yesteryear. I don't know what that's about. I recently met with the Cuban ambassador to Jamaica, and it's not pretty what's happening there. And the same thing with Haiti. We have to live what we say we believe in. And we can't allow the North-South dialogue and alliances to prevent us from protecting our own people and the injustice that they are facing. As most of you know, here you're in a university setting, you know the history of Haiti. You know that in order to live as free people and to secure their independence, they had to pay reparation to France. They never finished paying that debt off until about 1947. And they have suffered for it. And when we're sending back Haitian people, we forget the Deep Nine of 1817. We have to become more compassionate, and we have to understand that we're one people. We have suffered from colonialism, from chattel enslavement in our part of the world. And I know that every day where the governments are struggling to make ends meet for, the government's own setting, its own country, its own people. But I believe that until we find a way to support each other, and we have CARICOM, which I think is a far way better than what existed before with just, individual countries. But at the same time, we're also being squeezed by multinational corporations and the fact that, and climate change. Climate change is real. You look around the disappearing rivers and springs, the frequency of earthquakes, floods, it's worrying. And we know, as a historian, I know that a lot of that started with colonization and the destruction of the environment in the interest of plantation construction. It's real, and we just have to ensure that as a society, we find a formula to allow everyone to live. The issue of Gaza, well, I know that with regime change, political philosophy and support and alliances shift. And so I think we're all in the same boat, where we don't always agree with the position on that taken on the international stage by our governments. But what can we do? The only thing, and you are right, the government came out quickly in support of Israel. But the fact that when you go around Kingston, you see Gaza written all over the place in communities will tell you something about where the people's, philosophy lie, okay? So that's all I can say about that. But at the United Nations, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, I'm proud to say, using one of the articles of the convention, formed a commission to see what we could do in terms of this dispute. And the report should be out in another month. So you can look out for that report from the CERD on the Palestinian-Israeli issue and how we have managed to handle that. But we haven't stayed silent, and I'm proud of the committee. We didn't stay silent, even though it's not a popular position that we have taken. I know there are two more questions, but what are they? Oh, the Republic, the status of that discussion? Somebody wanted to know. We're stuck. That's all I can say. Well, I don't think that should have been the factor pushing us. I just think the country is not united over what we want to be. And people are not sure what it will mean if we're not within the British Empire. And they keep saying academics can say what they want to say, but they need a real education about what difference it will make. I think that's what people want to know. Right now, we are supposed to be within the British Empire. King Charles is supposed to be the King of Jamaica, but what is the difference? We still have to buy a visa to go there. We're still racially profiled. British people can still come to Jamaica without a visa, come to Jamaica and feel all right. and we go to Britain and we don't feel all right. So people are really saying, what difference will it make? But the real reason why we are stuck, and the report has not really gone anywhere, the first report, is that we're divided over the final Court of Appeal. Should it be the Privy Council or should it be the Caribbean Court of Justice? And that's why we're stuck. And I don't know what will make us get unstuck. We're stuck. And I'm stuck for an answer to you because we're stuck, clearly. I'm a little bit peeved because I was told that I was going to be a part of the commission and they dropped me. If I know what? Yes, man. Of course I know that what Muta said. But hopefully we'll get unstuck because we have elections in 2 years and I think something will shift. But the judgment of the Privy Council in the UK over, what's his name again? Vybz Kartel, right. Has put us in quite a pickle. Yes. And I think we were going on swimmingly before, but the Vybz Kartel issue, I think, has gotten us a little bit stuck. But hopefully it won't stay that way because there are negotiations going on for the two prime ministers to get together and sit down and don't move. I think that was the headline. Sit down and don't move until you come to an agreement over the CCJ and the way forward. I still think they're making a mistake not to put me on the commission. But how can you have this discussion without a historian? So we'll see where that goes. Anyway, I think it's the last question. The legacies and what we do since we're still living with them, how do we organize our societies? It's hard because we can't say, let's just stop, abandon Western culture and start afresh. That's never going to happen. And I think I said before in answer to another question that we just have to decide on some shared values. We will never be one ideology. We're going to be multi-religious, multilingual within the same space. Respect is what we have to search after and just accept people for who they are, but ensure that development comes to everyone and we don't leave people behind. That's the SDGs, that's an ideal. In Jamaica, we have our 2030 vision, that's the ideal. But we are pretending, and this is where I have to end, and I apologize if I didn't answer everything the way you wanted me to answer, but reparatory justice, we have to unite around this as former colonized people, you know. How do you go into people's country, conquer? There's genocide against indigenous people. People are marginalized from their land. The resources are controlled by a small group of people. Then independence comes and you say, go develop. With what? This is the case of the Caribbean. In 1939, one of the MPs in the UK actually said that the squalor in the Caribbean is a result of British action there. We can read and write now. We can go to the archives. We know we saw the evidence. This is what the MP said. Creech Jones, that's what he said. There's a 30-year period on archival documents, as you know. Every year people line up at the British Library and the Parliament, wherever the parliamentary papers are, to see what is the new secret that is now out. This is how Professor Beckles found those documents and wrote the book, How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean. You must read that book. you want to cry. To see how people just felt that we were nothing, and yet the enslavers got reparation in 1834. And Britain didn't finish paying off the loan that it took to pay those planters until 2015. The same year in which former Prime Minister Cameron came and tell us, let's be friends. We can be friends. And you haven't settled your debt. And give us prison to boot. We don't want a prison, we want reparation. We know, so I'm just saying it's a just cause. And remember the first Pan-African conference, the first reparation conference in Abuja, Nigeria, with Chief Abiola and Dudley Thompson and all these visionaries. We need to carry on that work. Reparation is not a pipe dream. It is not an act of begging. It is a right. And we have to get around it, because people can't just come and underdevelop a place and then we are now scrambling for development. So that's why the CARICOM Reparation Commission, the heads of government of CARICOM have said it's a development package that we want. We want more schools, we want to train more teachers, we want more mental health institutions, and yes, alongside that is a calculation about what it will cost. But we're not saying every person in the Caribbean must get $25,000 or whatever it is that has going on in the United States. We're saying this is what it will cost to get 100 more schools, or whatever the figure is. Go and look at the Brattle report. I think the current figure is $101 trillion for the Americas that they owe. And so we'd have to sit down and say, well, how far will this go in terms of the development plan that we want? So the work is going on. Every country has a reparation committee. And those who thought it would never happen, well, it always looks impossible until it happens, right? Because universities are owning up to their past. By the way, the Vice Chancellor of Oxford, when she came to Jamaica, she said, yeah, maybe road should fall, but not now. Yeah, she said she went and looked at it, and you know that donors were threatening to pull out, right? So, no movement on that. Did you have a roads must fall here somewhere too? Yes. Did roads fall? Did the monument come down? Yes. Half of the, oh, you mean half?
The statue fell, well, the students, the statue was removed, but the monument of roads behind the University.
Oh, I see.
So the past and the building.
Yeah. And after they toppled Colston, somebody wanted to go and pick him back up. So I don't know what has happened there. But Barbados took down Nelson and confined him to a museum. In the Caribbean, we don't say destroy the monuments. We say for the future generation, for the education of the children, build a museum and put them there so that people can go and know who they were and what they did. But put other monuments on the landscape. We haven't been able to move Queen Victoria, unfortunately. I think somebody took her down once, a long, long time ago. But they put her back up, but her bottom now face the road. And the park is not Victoria Park anymore. It's called St. William Grant Park. But nobody knows what St. William Grant look like because there's no monument of St. William Grant in the park. So it's a work in action. That's all I'm saying. It continues. But reparation is being paid. People are offering reparation. The Trevelyan's have paid something to Grenada. The Gladstones paid something to Guyana. I don't hear anybody's paying anything to Trinidad. But about 6 people are offering to pay in Jamaica. Some New Zealanders contacted me recently. They are related to the people who murdered the people in Hanover in the Argyle War. And people are just finding these things out from the UCL, the University College London database. Anything you want to know, now you can know. The evidence is there. Reparation is a right. It is not an act of begging. And until, you have my song, sir? You have war. Until the philosophy. Is that war? Yes, of course it's war. I don't want war though, you know. But I just want until the philosophy is destabilized. Can we do that? Let's hear it. Come on, selector. Selector.
Prof, should we do thank yous while
right.
the selectors still...
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all being here with us this afternoon. Your presence is really appreciated. I would just like to say a few words of thanks on behalf of our CARICOM heads of mission in South Africa, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us this afternoon. I would like to extend a warm thank you to Professor Shepherd for that wonderfully engaging and insightful lecture. It was an absolute honor to be here today and to listen to a lecture delivered by one of the foremost and most distinguished historians from the Caribbean region. So thank you, Dr. Shepherd, for sharing with us, your knowledge and perspectives this afternoon. I would also like to say a thank you to my fellow Trinbagonian, Dr. Victoria Collis Buthelezi, who is an astute academic in her own right. It always makes me so proud whenever I see Caribbean people across the world excel in just in various fields. No matter whichever country you go to, you must find, Caribbean people excelling and really making the region proud. So Dr. Collis Buthelezi and to the University of Johannesburg on the whole, thank you so much for everything and making today possible. I would also like to say a special thank you, I'm not sure if I'm seeing him in the room, to James MacDonald. Yes, he was very instrumental with helping us coordinate everything today, from the venue to the menu. He even engineered a flagpole for us this afternoon. He was very, very, very helpful. So thank you to James. Last but not least, I would like to thank everyone here who took the time to join us here today. Your engagement during the question and answer segment made today's lecture an even more enriching experience. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
We just have some gifts that we would like to give. So first we have for Professor Vereen A. Shepherd. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving us that lecture. We truly appreciate it. And for the 4 Caribbean missions, we just want to say thank you. And we look forward to further collaboration. Do we have it? Bob Marley, War.
Until the philosophy which old one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. everywhere is war. It's a war that until they're no longer first class and second class citizens of any nation, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. Miss a war that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race. This a war that until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, rule of international morality will remaining but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Now everywhere is war, war, and until the ignoble and unhappy regime that hold our brothers in Angola, in Mozambique, South Africa, subhuman bondage have been toppled, totally destroyed. Well, everywhere is war. Miss a war. War in the east, war in the west, war up north, war down south, war, war, rumors of a war. And until that day, the African continent will not know peace. We Africans will fight, we find it necessary, and we know we shall win, as we are confident in the victory of good over evil.